Joining me now is Fund Manager and Commodities Analyst Sam Berridge. Sam, thank you for joining us. We know security of energy supply is a pressing issue across the country. Here in WA, the Cook Labor government has told gas suppliers to get moving on idle gas fields. If only it was that easy. In your view, what are the biggest impediments to the exploitation of those gas fields?
Hi, Caroline. I think the key challenges are twofold. I mean, firstly, gas companies, or any company for that matter, just craves certainty and stability. So if you have a stable, approval regime for these projects to work through, then that would be a big step. I mean, you can't have projects which require, thousands of people to be mobilised for their construction stopped halfway through due to a sort of a never-ending process of appeals for a project which has already been approved. So, certainly that's part of it. But, this leads into the next question, which is on cost and economic viability. When you have uncertainty, that invariably leads to higher costs. And if a higher cost project is less likely to be developed than a lower cost project, and Australia might have a rich mineral endowment, but we certainly don't have a monopoly on minerals around the world, and capital is mobile. So if we can't provide a stable regime for which companies can invest in, then those investment dollars are going to go elsewhere.
Absolutely, and I suppose we've seen that to some extent with lithium in recent months, but there are still a number of things which can be controlled in, I suppose, a domestic political environment. Do you think that there is the political will within the Cook Labor government to try and overcome and smooth over some of these potential issues?
They can try, but the offshore gas projects that Roger Cook was referring to, they lie in federal waters, so they can certainly lobby the government. And I think Roger Cook has been very realistic in acknowledging that there is a potential shortage of gas in Western Australia if we don't have more projects coming online to replace the supply that's rolling off. I mean, that's certainly a start, but I think that. Whether or not that will to improve the project approval process is matched by his federal counterparts is another question.
Speaking of federal counterparts, and Minister for Energy and Climate Change, Chris Bowen, he continues to spruik his green energy plan. Now, this was my favourite part of his opinion piece in the Fin yesterday. He said, "Our potential comparative advantage is huge. More sunlight hits our country than any other country on the planet. Our wind is above average. We have abundant vital minerals." Now, Sam, we keep being told by the government that wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy available, despite warnings from industry that we will all be paying more. Perhaps Chris Bowen doesn't quite know what a comparative advantage means. Now, look, no doubt the plan is ambitious, but is it even achievable or desirable for that matter?
I don't know if it is achievable, and I'll go through the reasons why I say that. So, I mean, firstly, just on this point that renewables are cheapest, I mean, that's completely different to a renewable energy system. Chris Bowen relies heavily or leans heavily on the CSIRO Gen Cost report to make that statement. But just to be clear, like this report assessed costs from the point of view of an investor. And they made a clarification on that point in October last year. So that's entirely different to the costs borne by the consumer. So an investor doesn't have to pay for the costs involved in transforming an intermittent power supply into reliable 24/7 electricity. So those costs are borne by the consumer, and the consumer is finding out just what those costs mean as the months and years tick by. But I mean, back to your point on whether or not it's achievable, I think there's a limit to how much, to what extent consumers and industry can tolerate, continually increasing electricity costs. We've already seen heavy industry start to shut down in Victoria and New South Wales due to high power prices, and I think there is a limit to the extent that people will continue to sustain these cost increases, and I suspect that limit will be exceeded by current energy policy.
And Sam, don't we leave Australia a bit exposed in an economic sense, a security sense, even just a general societal sense, if we're ideological and careless about any transition away from fossil fuels? I mean, the consequences of getting this wrong are huge, aren't they?
Oh, they're massive. I mean, energy sits right alongside food and water as being critical for modern life. We haven't had to worry about energy prices for a very long time because they've been remarkably stable. But obviously, that's all changing now. The next shoe to drop is going to be the requirement for LNG imports into the east coast of Australia to meet the gap between demand and supply. I mean, gas costs 50% more than the current price of gas on the east coast, and that's going to be flowing through to energy bills over the next 12 to 18 months. And so, not only is it higher cost, it's also higher emission. So, it really is a lose-lose situation. And so, going forward, Australian consumers are going to have to compete with international markets for LNG. And to just highlight what that means, I mean, over in the UK, through the winter that's just gone, I mean, people are limiting the heating of their house to 2 hours a day through wintertime because of the exorbitant cost of power. So, I mean, this is what it means to be connected to international markets, and that comes with higher emissions as well. So, these are some of the consequences of getting energy policy wrong.
Now, on to the upcoming budget, and the Treasurer is doing his best to keep expectations in check. Commodity prices have held up the budget since Labor came to power, but good runs, as you well know, don't last forever. How fraught is our immediate economic and budgetary future?
I think in the very short term, we're probably okay, but our position relative, to the rest of the world in terms of, how wealthy we are is deteriorating. The rest of the world certainly seems to be coping with higher interest rates a bit better than Australia is. I mean, here we've got rising housing prices, stubbornly high and stubbornly high and likely to rise further are power costs, and that means higher interest rates for longer. So, that coupled with some big question marks on ongoing sort of budgetary requirements to fund things like the NDIS. Puts a big question mark over how our profitability and quality of life, I think, are going to look like over the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
And do you think the budget is trying to ignore that obvious issue of the additional baked-in operational spend? We don't seem to talk about those sorts of things, but those are the ones that into the future really do impact us.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the world is still subjected to the moral hazard which came with free money for a long time, and no one wants to give that up, and certainly no government wants to explain to their voters that debt is starting to cost a fair bit. We're going to have to cut back and do more with less. So it's incredibly painful for governments, both here and around the world, to have that conversation. But that's something that needs to be had, and any budgetary decisions which lead to waste, the cost of that waste is increasing with interest rates, and we're going to have to do something about that.